And we're live. Hey, Nodrik.
Hello. Hey. Oh, there. Hey.
Yeah, I'm on the other side. What happened?
Mirror reflections. Okay.
So yeah, Nodrik, you had this book, Nonviolent Communication, um, that you wanted us to explore a little bit. Um, I think it's really good to pay attention to the way that we're communicating with each other, to figure out better ways to bring across our point, right? Because we're not the only person in the conversation. When we say something, the message needs to be received as well. And sometimes it's really important how we package the message so that we can uh, come over in a less threatening way, right? Like a lot of times when there's a miscommunication, there's a way in which the other person feels threatened, right? Like there's a threat of violence that they're experiencing, and if we can formulate ourselves differently, then maybe we can prevent that emotional reaction. So yeah, Nodrik, what do you think about that, and why do you want us to read this book?
Well, a lot of bad news lately. And Twitter gets more and more heated, I feel. So that book came into my hands because EM, who is my friend painter, all those paintings I have, she recommended me that book a year ago. Oh, let's let Shleef in.
There.
Okay, hello. Hi, Shleef. Um, so so I finally got around to read that book and I'm extremely impressed. And I want to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah.
why, yeah, Sleeve? Why are you here? Like, what do you want to get out of this?
Just seemed like something interesting to be in. I mean, nonviolent communication sounds like it could either be something really cool and useful, uh, or you know, maybe it would be something something that I wouldn't find like any use for. But I'm optimistic. I mean, let's see how it goes.
Yeah. So I I have some problems when people are trying to systematize things. So I think it's important for us to realize that a system is a tool. It's something that can help us be in a better relationship to something, but we shouldn't hold to the system, right? Like the system is something that can bring us to a better place. But if we hold on to it, we become mechanical in our relationship, right? So uh, that's what I'm hesitant about when we get to these systems of relating or understanding things. And so there's two things that I want to highlight in how you can approach uh, the book and the things that they're uh, providing you with, right? So first thing is you can use the book as a mirror, right? So they're saying, well, there's this situation and you can handle the situation this way, right? Like that means that you're in that situation and you're handling it differently, probably, or you're already doing it right. So if you're handling it differently, it's important to check with yourself, why are you doing that, right? Like what is the thing that you're trying to achieve? What is the motivation behind your action? And then you can get some insight inside in yourself, right? Like there's a frustration probably that you're trying to express with your uh, with your actions, and therefore you're enacting a suboptimal behavior, right? And then the book is also like a way of pointing at things that are possible, right? Like it's pointing at new ways of expressing yourselves, right? So there's ways that you haven't thought of, right? You haven't realized yet, and you can use these ways to supplement the way that you're already expressing yourself. So that's the way I would approach this book.
I think maybe one thing to add to that is that a lot of times you have some things that work for you and some things that don't, and then when you read something that kind of puts it into a framework, you can hone in better on the things that work and kind of realize what's the bigger structure that they belong to, and not just kind of randomly find them. So at least when it's written well and it's useful, I think that's what it helps out with.
Yeah. To me, it was refreshing. The idea is that I can step back from my emotional state, let's say, and observe the communication that is trying to come up. And usually, if before I would go the route that was implanted in me by repeating many times over the same way of answering and seeing the conflict, let's say, I when I would add those, let's say, 4 pillars of nonviolent communication to the thought process, I would notice that there are like at least 2 steps that I never used in communicating things with others. And so that one was a big deal for me. I wanted to share it. But that's true. It is a tool. Depends why you're using it, that tool. What's the reason for you to use it? Yeah. What do you want to get out of it? Let's say. To me, it's something that I need to say what I want without offending others. Because usually I would like go in like a, I don't know, rhino into explaining something and everybody gets offended. I don't know why. And I feel like, why are you all offended with me? And now I can see. So like a mirror. Step back and observe.
Absolutely can relate to that. Most of my early life, that was the experience. You know, I would say some things that even people would tell me, right? You're not saying anything I necessarily disagree with, but I don't want to talk to you, right? I don't want to get into this discussion because, you know, for a lot of reasons, and so I think it's definitely a worthy cause because it's kind of similar to what I think John Vervaeke was talking about in the first lectures in his Awakening from a Meaning Crisis, where he talks about truth and relevance, right? Even if you have truth, if you can't make it relevant for people, if you can't make it transformative, if you can't, being right is not enough, basically. And I think it's a very sad thing to be really convinced how right you are and really annoyed at how people are not listening to you, not realizing that maybe you need something more than just having really good arguments.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's important to know that there's many ways to be right? Like there's you're right within a frame, and people are not always with you in that frame. And I think the more important thing is to be together, right? To be looking at the same thing instead of being right in your thing. Because if its importance isn't shared among each other, then like it's not important, right? Like it's only important to you. And if it's only important to you, then you're being selfish in some sense, right? By making it important. And sometimes that's okay, and sometimes that is actually destructive to the relationship and to even your own goals. So yeah, Nodrik, you prepared a slideshow, so I guess we'll get on to that, and maybe you want to accompany it with what you've been thinking about. So
Okay.
Go ahead.
That's the book Nonviolent Communication by Marshall B. Rosenberg. The link to the Wikipedia page is in the description. Next slide. A short introduction, but I actually wanted to read what he wrote about it before. Believing that it is our nature to enjoy giving and receiving in a compassionate manner, I have been preoccupied most of my life with two questions. What happens to disconnect us from our compassionate nature, leading us to behave violently and explosively? And my preoccupation took me through a journey, and he wrote this book. The idea that he introduces in first chapter, that there are 4 pillars to nonviolent communication. Can you show next slide, Manuel? Yeah, there. First, observation. It's the way we even think and perceive situation, not necessarily saying it before. It's like how we already start thinking about it, deconstructing, let's say, whatever wave of information floods us. That's how I understand. It's totally my projection. So observation.
Yeah, let's just talk about this a
Okay.
little bit first, right? So if we're observing, right, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong, but we're communicating the observation as well, right? Right, and that's important, right? Because if you're communicating the observation, you're now sharing what is real to you, right? Like I'm seeing the world like this, right? And that gives you the opportunity to reflect upon what you're seeing, but it also gives the other person a way to participate in what you see. Because
Oh,
if
hold
they
on.
don't,
Yeah, Manuel, that's not what I was trying to say.
okay.
I'm not yet at the level of communicating those 4 components.
Okay.
I'm at the level of communicating them to myself.
Mm-hmm.
So before we move on to talking to other people, that's what I tell to myself in order to deconstruct the emotional thing. So instead of I have to count from 10 to 1, instead of counting from 10 to 1, I'm like telling to myself, I observe this. What do I feel? I feel this. Do you understand what I'm aiming at?
Mm-hmm.
So this communication, not to another person, this is to myself. That's how I read it at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that is really important, right? So there's a stepping back and reflecting, letting things settle, articulating your opinion towards yourself before you engage. Yeah, so maybe you go through the process that you're going inside of yourself with these steps, these 4 steps.
Yeah. So when there is situation arises that requires my immediate reaction, I suspect, based on my previous behavior, that my immediate reaction might lead to conflict. So in order to react differently before communicating, I'm trying to go through all those 4 steps by naming, let's say, I observe people saying too many things. I feel confused. Let's say what I need to take a step back. I'm asking myself to be centered. That's how I deconstruct whatever is happening instead of reacting too fast. Like, for example, yesterday, during the test when situation was absolutely unpredictable for me, I did not use those 4 and went into a very expressive mode, which was, let's say, my autopilot. Let's say, how is it for you, Shleef?
So I think one interesting thing to note about this is that in order to have nonviolent communication, you need to have partners that are also within that framework. Because I can think of a lot of cases, especially when you have more than a dialogue, when you have a conversation that has more people around, and you start, for instance, to go back and observe, then people are kind of saying things and maybe you have something to say about that, but by the time you finished observing, they've moved on to the next topic, and you're still observing, you're kind of looping through these steps. And there's an important element of, to be in that kind of space, I think you need to have it available to you. And I feel that sometimes there are interesting situations, and how do you manage to take a conversation that is, let's say, more contentious or just more intense, and how do you still manage to kind of pull back and get a good dialogue out of it? And I feel like this is really useful, but only in a frame where you have a kind of consensus on that those are the rules.
So is there a specific way that you manage that for yourself, apart from having rules?
I manage what?
Well, to in that contentiousness, right? You can have agreed upon rules, but Nodrik just went to this outline of like, oh, I made this rule for myself, right? Like, and it's not important who I talk to, because like I need to do that for myself. Do you have something like that as well?
So I think a lot of it is just an attempt to notice where I'm coming from. I mean, it's similar to observation in that sense, but what I mean specifically is more close to, am I automatic now? Am I just like in this Philean IKEA kind of thing, where I just want to win this argument, or do I actually want to communicate with people? And I guess I can't really put it in a rule. I saw a question pop up. I'm not sure.
Yeah, you want to take the question? Here you go.
How does that make you feel? I'm not sure what that is.
Well,
Manuel asking the question probably.
Yeah, I just think it's a kind of procedural knowledge more than something that I can put into propositions. Right? After being in a lot of conversations and having that intent and trying to build that kind of relation, you start to kind of swim in it more intuitively without having to follow specific rules. That's at least my experience.
Mm-hmm. So Viveki has this idea where you're sometimes taking off your glasses, right? Like what you're swimming in, and then you try and look at them, right? So is that a thing that you do?
For sure. So one of the movements that constantly happens is, or at least I can say happened several times as an example, is I'm having a conversation with someone, let's say a close friend, and I suddenly it becomes a kind of argument, and I'm not sure why, and I stop to say, like, wait, what is going on here? Like, what is actually bothering me, and what is the other person actually upset about? because there's a kind of narrowing when you have, especially contentious conversations. You just like, but that argument is wrong. But okay, but just that's not important if that argument is right or wrong, maybe. And maybe it's more critical to just understand what the situation that's going on. What am I actually going through? Is this unpleasant? Am I really enthusiastic? Am I actually seeing the other person and where they're at? So I think a lot of times it happens that I might like do that a bit too much, and people are saying, stop asking me, how if this is okay or what I'm doing, I'm fine. But I tend to kind of be more, instead of going into a longer, like, I'll give you all of my worldview and everything right now in 5 minutes of intense conversation. It's kind of like, okay, I said something now. Where are you at? Like, are you with me? Are you tired? Do you want to cut this conversation? And to enable myself to kind of power down in a way, because I really want to get that point across, but it doesn't matter if the other person isn't listening. Right? So just like, take a step back.
So what you're saying is that there's like a higher goal that you're participating in the conversation, and you're not always aware of it, right? Like, and then when you get in this contentious nature, then you lose track of it, right? Like Nodrik read this introduction, right, where there was a reference to how we disconnect from compassion into our violent nature, right? So I'm not so certain about whether we already have this compassion, but there is this disconnection definitely happening, right? Where we lose the sight, right? Like the grand picture. We lose our connection to the grand picture, and we're focusing on these details, and we want to be right. And yeah, so it's really important to keep somewhere inside of you this place of like, what is important to me, right? Like, why am I talking to this person? Like, am I talking to this person to be right in the subject, or like, am I doing something more? And can I achieve that, right? Because that's also important, right? Like, sometimes you're just emotionally charged, and this other person isn't emotionally charged, and what is required is to let go of that emotion, right? And sometimes persisting in the thing that you're doing, right? The disagreement, even if you take a step back, is still not going to lead to the productive conversation that you want to have. Nodrik, maybe you want to add something.
Yeah, it's just again to summarize. It's a tool to take a step back for me, and I hope it will be useful somehow. I would like to see the next slide after that one. And
Well, yeah. Well, we can go back to this one later, I guess.
Yes. So in here, as we keep our attention focused on the areas mentioned and help others to do likewise, which is like a whole next level. I don't think others will do that and dance to our tune, but we establish a flow of communication back and forth until compassion manifests naturally. What am I observing, feeling, needing? What am I requesting to enrich my life? And then it goes to the other person. What you observing, feeling, needing to enrich your life. So I think Shleef and Manuel already talked about it. You guys, basically, it depends on the person in front of you. How would they react to you acting like that? Because I honestly heard people think it's condescending and passive aggressive. acting like that, like just described. So I'm interested in your thoughts about it.
Yeah, so I want to say that it's important, right? Like in some sense, this is relating to the humanity in us. We want to nourish each other. We want to create a space for self-expression, for safety, for comfort, right? And I would say that there's a time and place for this, right? And I think there's also a time and place for being more contentious or more determined, productive. And so I would say you shouldn't take this as a universal. It's important to realize that this fulfills a function, but I would argue that is an important function, and I think people tend to be disconnected from expressing themselves in this way, right? Like I've been talking about that we're living in an intimacy crisis lately a lot, and I think what we've seen described is there's a way of being, right? A way of paying attention, a way of having a shared reality that allows for intimacy. And I think that is a necessary skill as a human that we all should cultivate. Shleef?
Yeah, I agree. I guess one thing that I can say about that is I really relate to this notion that it could be interpreted or experienced as kind of condescending and passive aggressive, because it could actually be that. It's wisdom is hard, is what I'm trying to say, because if you just take the system and internally, let's say you're motivated by trying to be still, right, but this is a new tool for you to be right. So instead of actually addressing your partner's claim, because maybe it's really important for them to actually have their claim tended to, and you're saying, but what are you feeling? And like, that's not what I'm trying to talk about. Like, what I'm feeling maybe isn't relevant at the moment. And like, yes, but let's follow the system. Maybe not, right? So I think it's really something that, like, you can never narrow it down to like follow this and everything will be fine.
Yeah. There is example at the end of chapter 1. It's page 13 and 14. I did not want to add it to the slides because it's a bit too much. It's a conversation, which I wanted
can put it
to.
on if you want me to.
Yeah, it would be awesome. Thank you, Manuel. So it's a conversation between a refugee and Marshall B. Rosenberg himself, who came to give lectures in the place of war and crisis, let's say, and he's teaching people as an American. He's teaching people nonviolent communication, and then he's like murderer, like he gets called all those names, and he put in the conversation between him and the person who was accusing him of things, that anger. And yeah, at first the question is, do you guys read it as condescending? I think we can go to the conversation. Is there a way to enlarge it? It's like a yeah. So Manuel, would you do the honors to read it?
Yeah. I was presenting nonviolent communication in a mosque.
I'm just on here.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Would you like to introduce yourself, and have you heard of that book, Nonviolent Communication?
Oh, Never mind. I guess you should leave because y'all are into something like personal, right?
We are discussing a book.
Okay. Well, all right. Sorry.
No problem. Yeah, so let's continue.
Right. So I was presenting nonviolent communication in a mosque at the Hesha refugee camp in Bethlehem to about 170 Palestinian Muslim men. Attitudes towards Americans at that time were not favorable. As I was speaking, I suddenly noticed a wave of muffled commotion fluttering through the audience. They're whispering that you're American, my translator alerted me. Just as a gentleman in the audience leapt to his feet, facing me squarely, he hollered at the top of his lungs, "Murderer!" Immediately, a dozen other voices joined him in a chorus. Assassin! Child killer! Murderer! Fortunately, I was able to focus my attention on what the man was feeling and needing. In this case, I had some cues. On the way into the refugee camp, I had seen several empty tear gas canisters that had been shot into the camp the night before. Clearly marked on each canister were the words "Made in the USA." I knew that the refugees harbored a lot of anger towards the US for supplying tear gas and other weapons to Israel. I addressed the man who had called me a murderer. Are you angry because you would like my government to use its resources differently? I didn't know whether my guess was correct, but what is critical is my sincere effort to connect with him, with his feelings and need. Right. So I actually would want to analyze this first response.
Yes.
So
also, hello, Shane.
Hello, Shane. My impression of this first response is it's reframing the situation into a context that is relevant to the other person. So there's a when people make havoc or whatever, right? Like there's a way in which they're not participating, they're not feeling connected to what is going. And I think what he's doing is he's opening the possibility for establishing a connection with these people. So yeah, Nodrik, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's what he did here. Like before asking the question, he made an observation for himself. So contextualizing what is happening, just like I am observing, and so he's using it here and trying to see if he observes the same thing as the other person. And obviously he isn't, kind of like he's still dancing around the subject, trying to contextualize it. So I think it's the first part is him trying to correctly observe the situation, also from the point, assess the situation, also from the point of view of the Palestinian man. Yeah. What do you think, Shleef and Shane?
So, Shane, you want to go?
Yeah, I had like sort of a like if so this was I don't know what the so I'm guessing maybe like information is sort of maybe produced with like political motive behind it, like people's maybe view is like restricted. So if you're talking if somebody is uninformed and grasping like the situation is either like beyond their ability, then you can't really like you can't get mad at the person. Like but like I think so. What I was gonna say is like if somebody's it's like being I think part like when I know that like standing almost in you the information you have and like changing accordingly, like if you realize something you didn't know. But I think like standing in your information but also being like that's a person, you know, like I don't know what like I would do besides that in order to like conduct myself like in a way that was had the like standing in that as a way of like moving forward. But
Mm-hmm. So how about you try and figure out what you think, and we'll go to sleep a bit.
So one thing that I think is really important here that he's not saying is the context in which this is happening, which really matters. So he's actually giving this lecture, and there are people that came to hear him giving this lecture, and then this erupts. And that's really important because that's the context that allows you to break that frame and have a communication with the person that's yelling at you. Because you have all the conditions, right? The people around maybe actually want to hear your lecture. Maybe some of them are on the side of this angry person, and some of them just think, come on, let us just hear that lecture. And you really have to be aware of the context of where is this conversation happening and what's going on. And I think that's why responding that way is not only a way of showing compassion to this person, but it's also posing a challenge, right? You're accusing me, you're trying to break the conduct of this lecture, and I accept that and where you're coming from, but also I'm not going to like break entirely out of this place, out of what I'm here to do, what I believe in. I'm going to create a space for that within the existing context. So I think that's what makes this a really powerful move in that case. Whereas if, like for instance, if this were something where the situation was contentious to begin with, so he's coming to some stage where everyone already hates him, I don't think this would work at all.
Yeah. So you're touching on an important point, right? It's like, will this work, right? And I think it is a really dangerous move to do this, right? So there's a different way that you can approach this, right? You can give this person a voice, right? Like, do you want to voice your objection to me, right? And then you're not putting him in this political frame, which like I don't even know. I don't think that's necessarily a good move, right? Because you're also pointing it away from the personal relationship between you and the other person. But yeah, you're right. Like he is using the situation that presents itself in order to still enact his vision, right? His message, without continuing his lecture, but bring it into practice. And I think that's really, really good and really valuable to do that.
Yeah, just to be clear, I mean, I think it is really not to be taken for granted. Like I didn't mean that it's something easy just because that's what he did. I think it's much easier to kind of fall into an automatic response and kind of, I don't know, call security or something. And somehow try to get back to your original frame. Just wanted to make
Okay.
that clear.
So let's go to his next move. Damn right I'm angry. You think we need tear gas? We need sewers, not your tear gas. We need housing. We need to have our own country. So you're furious and would appreciate some support in improving your living conditions and gaining political independence? Yeah, I'm going to be highly critical on this one, so maybe someone else should go first with this.
I think he's still trying to assess the situation. He's trying to understand what exactly does the man wants without assuming it first. So he does this move where he asking questions to see where it lands correctly. Hi, Ariel. So he's trying to probe a man and to see where what actually the man wants. Does he wants to just talk his emotions out? Does he want to be heard, or does he actually request from Marshal Rosenberg to talk about it? So I do think the politically charged story that he chose for chapter 1 is a strong move, let's say, precisely knowing his history that he talked before about. And when I heard about this, I remember also my my mom, who was saying similar things about whatever is happening in her country currently. Yeah, so that one is really close to home, as far as I'm concerned. So, Ariel,
Hey, how are you all?
thank you. Thank you for standing up so early. Is it like your 6 a.m. or something?
It's almost 5, but
Oh,
yeah, I would have been awake anyway. But yeah, I'm just working on some homework in the background before I go to sleep.
well, thank you for being here, man. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having us and me.
Yeah, so Shleef, you want to get your opinion, and then Ariel can have his opinion afterwards.
Well, I'm not sure yet what your objections are. I can assume a few things that are objectionable. What I would say is that sometimes there's a reason to, especially if you have some sort of position that is formal or semi-formal, to have some concrete response. Because sometimes people would catch that if you're not saying anything specific, that you're just trying to bullshit them. So I'm not sure if this is exactly the right move, or it's obviously never the ideal move. And what I'm saying is I'm not sure what specifically would be a better move. So I'm curious to hear, because you were promoting yourself that you have this strong objection, so I'm waiting to hear it.
Ariel, what do you think about his question?
So, I mean, I feel like I might be missing a bit of context, but let's see. So you're furious and would appreciate some support in improving. Yeah, I feel like I need more context.
Okay, I'll take it then. So, yeah. So the thing that I'm missing is he's not validating the position of the other person, right? So he again is reframing what the other person is saying, and again he's moving away from the personal frustrations of this person, right? So the way I would respond is I hear your need. I respect that this needs to have a podium. How do you think we can work on this or something, right? Like what is the step that we can take forward, right? So again, the way approach that I would make is I would invite the other person more so to take responsibility in the conversation, right? Like you get your opportunity to participate, set the rules, right? Like state the things of import to you, and then we can engage with what is important to you.
I think he's still assessing the situation without claiming to understand the man. So he's at the first, like the 4 stages of nonviolent communication: observing needs, or observing, feeling, need, request. He's still at the stage 1. He tries to himself understand, assess the situation, put it in the frame. Like the way he does it, the only way he could do it is to repeat what the other person is saying, and then the other person would adjust everything until they find the common ground, and only then they can move into feelings. Because like if everything is feelings first, then it's probably will be even more heated. So Manuel, I think he's still at stage 1 at that point. So that's why I like that conversation. Yeah, Shleef?
I also want to add that to what you said, Manuel. First of all, yeah, I agree that it definitely might be that he's still in the observation phase, and that this question might be just a part of clarifying. But furthermore, in what you offered, Manuel, I feel like that's in many cases, and specifically in this case, I would predict that it would be a recipe for disaster, actually, because this is not a person who is necessarily very sharpened in exactly what he wants to say and how he wants to say it. And this is an inflamed crowd that he's in. So if you're going to say, I recognize your need, well, maybe that's going to just amplify the conflict now, right? You recognize, okay, what do you mean are we going to march together now and throw Molotov cocktails at parking cars? I mean, what does that really entail? And I think it's important when you're dealing with something that is so volatile to have a kind of a reframing, and maybe you'll miss it, but reframing this in a practical manner is a way of lowering the flames.
Yeah, I totally disagree there, but well, I'll just look at where he's going and what he's trying to do, because I think it's also important what you're trying to get out of the conversation, right? Like where you're steering it. But I think when you have adversality, the first thing you need to do is get rid of the the enemyness. Like you need to get back together, because if you're not on the same side, you're in a contentious situation, right? And first of all, I don't believe that you're going to resolve these emotions for these people. I don't think that's an option, right? I don't think he has the tools to do that either, right? Like he's not in a position to offer how his country is going to react differently or whatever. Like those things are not an option to him. But yeah, let's just see where it goes, because I don't feel like I need to criticize all that much. Do you know what it's like to live here for 27 years, the way I have with my family, children and all? Have you got the faintest idea what it's been like for us? Sounds like you're feeling very desperate, and you're wondering whether I or anybody else can really understand what it's like to be living under these conditions. Am I hearing you right? So, yeah, Nodrik, you want to pick it up?
Yeah, Shane, mute your mic. Yeah, thanks. So he is trying to understand the other person. Again, he is trying to see what side he's at before he implies that, like, oh, I already know what's going on. Before doing that, he actually tries to deeply understand what the other person is trying to communicate. Because the implication itself, that where you're like, I already understand you, is very superficial as far as I'm concerned. Like, so when he keeps trying to ask the question, even reframing, still the same. Sounds like you're feeling. So he's kind of straw manning, maybe, like, not straw manning, still manning, like one of those. So yeah. So he reframed it, but with the question at the end, am I right? Like, did I assess the situation correctly? Again, correct me if I'm wrong. So yeah, observation state still. But he tries to move to feelings, I see. You're feeling very desperate. So he's kind of moving a little bit from the observation to feeling. Yeah, what do you guys
who wants
think?
to pop in, step in if you have a comment. Okay, so what I'm seeing here is it's again framing it in a clinical way, right? Like I feel like he's like a psychologist or whatever, right? Like in a room. It's also I'm still wondering where he's going. It's I don't feel like this move is productive. And I also think it is, yeah, this is my main objection, right? Like I think it's kind of implying that this other person is rational, right? Like it's like this person has a well articulated opinion. He's here to set out this this objection or whatever, and I, when I would be in that situation, I wouldn't think that person in front of me is rational. I would think that person is caught in an emotional thing, and what they're saying is not necessarily the thing that they want to be working on, or that they feel that they need to be working on, right? Like there's a disconnect between a venting of the anger and their actual interests.
Shane, did you want to say something? Sorry, you unmuted your mic.
I think that's spot on. Because I was like, if I don't know, I can really understand what it's like living in. Yeah, like reading this, like I don't know, I feel like immediately I just go like I don't know, as a default, I just assume that people like want money, and so that's like I don't know, that my move, that would be like try and make money before. My thing is like make money before understanding, so that you have some way to help. And I don't know, I think that's like my like proxy way of like helping the irrational in people, because it's like, oh, like even if I find out like they're like, I just sort of like trust that people know like what they want, and then like help them like get there. But then you were saying that he might not even know what he wants, but I don't know. I usually tend to like think that people sorry.
But he might know, right? But he's a random guy. He's not a representative, right? So that's one thing. Secondly,
Right.
even if he knows, right, he's angry, right? So we were talking about how anger narrows you, right? Like it doesn't allow you to relate to the big picture. And so when you're angry, you're relating to a part of the picture, and often that's not the best part, because that's why you're angry, right? Like that's where your frustration is.
I think
Okay, so you're saying are am I understanding you right? You're saying like there's the understanding portion is kind of like it's, what would you say? Defective's obviously not the right word, but like he's trying to get what? He's trying to understand where understanding like might be irrelevant to like solving the problem. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, maybe so. Not irrelevant to the problem of him trying to write a book about understanding. No. So he's got his or like, yeah. But
Shleef, do you want to add something?
Yeah, to me, the subtext of this whole passage is just he's trying to convey, I'm making an effort to relate to you now. That's all, right? He can, maybe he's wrong or not, but that's all he's trying to convey to him. He said, do you even understand? So, like this is saying, let me try. I'm really trying now. And the rest is kind of just the form of it. And this is the actual subject.
Yeah, I agree with Shleef. He's using the tool, but the reason why he's using the tool is to show I'm making an effort. I'm trying to understand you. So there is in between manipulation and motivation, there is always a reason to do things. Let's say somehow that quote. He's making an effort. Yeah, Ariel.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, obviously, I don't think that any of this is like wrong or like unsympathetic, but it's just, I feel like at least the way that it's worded, it just comes across as very unnatural. Like, it's hard to really imagine a conversation being had like this.
Right.
I can imagine it, but it would be very cringe. Right? As someone in the crowd, it would just look like this guy is so detached. What is this? High and mighty talk.
right.
Sounds like you're very. This is not a psychologist's office. What is this jargon doing here?
Yeah, and
Yeah, imagine, guys, I talk to myself like that now.
You're your own psychologist's office. Okay. But yeah, like if I would be that guy, I would be really angry. I can tell you that.
Yes, that is why he's yelling.
No, I would be angry by the way that I was approached.
That's
I would feel it's condescending. I would feel like he's making an effort, but he's making the wrong effort, and I would be really upset with that.
maybe that's why the other guy's so emotional.
Yeah, part of it maybe. So let's go to the next bit. Do you want to understand? Tell me. Do you have children? Do they go to school? Do they have playgrounds? My son is sick. He plays in an open sewage. His classroom has no books. Have you seen a school that has no books? I hear how painful it is for you to raise your children here. You'd like me to know that what you want is what all parents want for their children: a good education, opportunity to play and grow in a healthy environment.
Beep boop, robot.
Yeah, that response was weak to whatever the guy said. The guy actually raised strong concerns, and like I did not like that bit.
So yeah, like it's again depersonalizing, right? It it feels really academic. All parents want this. Like, I don't care about all parents. Like, why are you talking about all parents? Like, it's also again not engaging with the emotions that this man is having. It's trying to lift it out of the emotional realm. And I really get like a politician vibe. Is like, ooh, how can I have the diplomatic answer where I'm not making the transgression and I'm keeping myself in the clear. I'm not putting guilt upon my shoulders. Like, it's like there's no skin in the game. That's what I think is going on.
Yeah, I feel distance in here. Like he distanced himself from the person. The person was like, "Here is what's in my heart." There. And as a response, he got this generalization, which basically would be the stone wall, in a way.
I think silence would be better. Just, acknowledge what he said. He'd probably say something else, after that. He has a lot to say. Just, shut up for a minute.
Yeah, at that point, assessment is not necessary for him. Like he should. Yeah, I agree. Silence might be better. You're muted.
I pressed the unmute button on Discord, but it doesn't work here. So yeah, that's funny. That's right, the basics, human rights. Isn't that what you Americans call it? Why don't more of you come here and see what kind of human rights you're bringing here? You'd like more Americans to be aware of the enormity of the suffering here and to look more deeply at the consequences of our political actions?
Yeah, I felt like it led nowhere.
It feels a bit like absurd theater, honestly.
Yeah, I don't believe that the guy said this actually. I think he made this up for his book.
Or it was
Like,
a really, really weird event, because there's also that. Sometimes when you're in an event and you're thinking to yourself, this is not real. People don't talk this way, and you actually see it happening.
so yeah, like I it's really really strange, like the framing of this conversation, right? It's like, why did we get to the point that more Americans should be going there to see things? Like how is that going to resolve anything? It's like, yeah, there's just from my perspective, it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of what's important, right? Like it's not important that Americans see this stuff, right? Like it's important that Americans give money to build sewers and buy books. That's what's important. Like all this awareness stuff, like it's this political frame that I don't really like.
This is just a stream of consciousness thing, but this actually really reminds me of yesterday's watch party, because his answers seem like what an AI would answer you if you had told him these things. So what I'm hearing is this, like, you're not getting it.
So yeah, we all go over there, and then we're all dead, and I guess that'd be the consequence of taking this advice.
Well, yeah, just let us finish this part, and then we can discuss the steps, because I think the steps have value in them. And so our dialogue continued, with him expressing his pain for nearly 20 more minutes, and I listening for the feeling and need behind each statement. I didn't agree or disagree. I received his word not as a text, but as a gift from a fellow human willing to share his soul and deep vulnerabilities with me. Once the gentleman felt understood, he was able to hear me as I explained my purpose for being in the camp, and an hour later, the same man who had called me a murderer was inviting me to his home in Ramadan for a Ramadan dinner. So my assessment of what happened in the conversation is he was intending to show his method. I think this is one of my problems with using a method, right? Like, he was privileging his method over the human connection, right? And he's saying, I was listening for his needs. Well, was he relating to the needs, right? Like there's a listening, and then there's dynamically using it to inform yourself and articulate a response. But yeah, like if you put this in conflict, in contrast to feeling attacked and getting angry at him, this is obviously way better than saying, "Oh, you should shut up," or whatever, right? Like, or we don't have responsibility as Americans to do these things. Like, yeah, like you're not going to achieve anything with that attitude. So yeah, what do you guys feel like it?
I think he just felt sorry for the American guy. Like, he was like, oh, he's probably not fully there. By the end of 20 minutes, he's like, oh, are you okay? Like, so like, I think that person had a really good heart, made up or not, and he was passionate, but then he was thinking he's talking to a robot who responds in a very unnatural way. It's like as if he talked to what is Mark Zuckerberg? It's like, and so by the end, I don't think the story actually played out as the way Marshall B. Rosenberg portrayed it in this book. So perhaps partially of it was adjusted in order to feed the narrative, plus impress the reader. I see a little bit of acting here. Just so yeah, we are welcomed by Chad as well. Sorry, Shleef.
So I absolutely agree with what you said, Manuel, and with the assessment that he just felt sorry for him. Nodrik, I think it's the only way that this story makes sense. But I think it's exactly what relates it to kind of the robotic behavior is this privileging of his method over actually being a human and realizing that this is hard, right? So he's presenting us with this algorithm, and then surprisingly, which is usually what doesn't happen in these kinds of books, he's actually showing us that he's following the algorithm to the letter, and how ridiculous it is to follow the algorithm to the letter in a real situation. So I can just add one more thing, which is I had an experience that kind of resembles what he's describing here. So I was playing a game, StarCraft, in this case, and I don't know why, but I decided to engage with the trolls in the StarCraft chat. So it was one instance where I was just, messing around and saying some, I wasn't saying bad stuff, but I was messing around with the trolls. And then, yes, feed the trolls, exactly. So there was one guy who kept saying, something like, oh man, that modernism. And I don't know what he meant. And then I said, oh man, that centrism of yours. I don't know what he meant. And then I said, I see you writing some words about what I'm saying. Do you actually have something to say about, do you have an actual claim, or you just, and then he started, quoting Hegel to me and started talking to me about stuff like why synthesis, or maybe synthesis is not good. In the end, like, we started having a conversation because, I managed to kind of actually get to, hey, what's going on here? Who are you? What do you actually want? And it was, I mean, we still talk sometimes. He's a great guy. Some troll on the StarCraft chat.
So yeah, does anybody else have something to say about the conversation? Else we can go back to the 4 steps of nonviolent communication, because I think that's where we should pay more attention.
Yeah. I just think, like, depending on the, like, I don't know, it seems like I'm thinking it's hard to, like, determine how, like, robotic without, like, the intonation being there, like how he like asked, but I don't know, maybe those things could have been said with, like, or asked with warmth, or in a way creating space for him to, like, dialogue minimally enough to literally go home with him and get dinner.
Get a room.
Yeah. And I don't know, I was also like, oh, maybe that plus sharing his intentions, like, developed some, I don't know, peace, or like understanding, and he was maybe down for the cause at that point. But yeah, those were my only thoughts.
Yeah, so you're raising an important point, right? Like, there's a spirit in which the communication happens, right? Like, there's a way of holding yourself when you're talking that can convey a sense of trust and compassion. That is often more important, right? Especially in this contentious situation, that is more conveying something relatable to that person than whatever words that you're using. Like, yeah, I think the words that you're using are secondary, and I think Nodrik had a really nice point, right? Like, I'm using these things for myself, right? So when you use these things for yourself, you can use that to be in the right spirit, right? Like, you use that to be attending to the right things and having the right feelings when you're presenting yourself. And yeah, I think maybe we want to get back to that. So yeah, Nodrik, do you want to say something about these 4 steps? And
I thought when Shleef engaged the troll, he was going with the observation, so he was trying to assess the way to, like, what troll is actually trying to convey, and the troll actually told Shleef, "I'm smart, and here is why I'm smart." So what he actually, like the reason behind all that conversation, he wanted to show other people how smart he is. And that was funny to me. Very, very actually subconsciously very humane response, which I like. Yeah, that was my favorite thing.
Just,
Yeah.
I agree, and I just want to add that there's also a very nice and human thing about it with trying to find a kindred spirit who actually cares and engages with those things. So I think there is usefulness to sometimes just trying to sound smart in that context if it can filter out all the people who don't know how to sound smart. If that's what you're looking for.
Yeah. So the thing that we didn't get into at the start, and I did want to get into, is if you share an observation, right? It's like, so for example, that happened a couple times, right? Like we're reading the text, like this guy is responding in this way, right? So now we all say, oh, I'm observing this, right? And what we ended on is there's this roboticness, right? Like there's this procedural element in his relationship that is unnatural, right? And now we can find commonality between each other, right? We can find a, 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 something in the world that we all relate to, and then we can say, well, ooh, yeah, like I maybe he was coming in the right spirit, right? So like my feeling about the robotness is not necessarily bad because there's a way in which it could still be positive, right? Or it's like, no, like I don't like that he's doing that because the robot like thing is dehumanizing, right? Like there's an element where he's not seeing the person, even though he's saying in the end, right, like I'm relating to his feelings and I'm relating to his needs, right? So and so yeah, so there's this relating to the feeling, and then there's relating to the needs, and the needs are something I feel like the feeling is pointing towards, right? So you have a feeling, and then you need to interpret, like what does it mean that I feel this, right? Like what does that mean that I have to do this in the world, right? And then yeah, you can state a request, a personal request, like I want this need fulfilled in this way, right? So now we're talking about implementation, sorry. um, but you can do this in a dialogical fashion as well, right? Like you don't have to only one-sidedly state these things, right? You can figure these things out together, and if you're on that path, right? I think that would be way better than having it be one-sided, because if you have one-sided, you get this robot-like behavior.
I think there's also an interesting element that because I'm presuming that because they mentioned Ramadan and this guy is not from there, so I'm assuming that there's probably some like cultural differences that might make it not like hard to relate, but just like there's certain things that like for instance the way how like the very procedural way that he breaks it down, although it's impersonal, I do think there are some elements that allows it to kind of make things, maybe the best term is cut and dry, where there's like no confusion about it. But I think part of the issue is that like there's a lot of cases where that might not be like the best way to actually connect with someone, but it might be the best way to understand what they like you know, if you're not already close with them.
Good point, Ariel. Yeah, Carl. Yeah, in the case of cultural differences, it is maybe crucial to try to understand like that's the only way he could probably at that stage. Like I'm even though I'm talking to myself like this robot, trying to practice it, it's precisely so that I do not go into anger spins. So somehow I have a question here from Sarah, our Sarah. Yes. Who would like to answer it?
Well, I'll read it first. In your opinion, would these 4 components lead to understanding, or is the understanding coming from another place?
So I could say something about that. I think understanding comes from, first of all, noticing when there has been a misunderstanding, maybe, using these 4 steps as not only going forward, but also tracing it back. So I think one thing that I think Ariel pointed out very nicely is that sometimes you might really just have some preconceptions that are just wrong. Like, you think that this is what people mean when they say this, and maybe they don't. Maybe that's colored your whole interaction with this person, and then you're not understanding them. So I think when you realize that something here isn't right, there's something going on that you just don't get, and maybe, tone it back, go back to feeling, okay, maybe that's not enough. Go back to what is going on here? Go back to that first step. And I think in that sense, like, you can try to relate to a person, but when that doesn't work, you can revert to being a bit of a robot, because that might be necessary to get to the understanding.
Yeah.
So to me, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's necessary for me somehow, although I do not try to talk like that to other people, because this actually seems condescending and very arrogant somehow, like the way, like, trying to express yourself this way. Yeah.
So a couple things, right? Like, I think Shleef made a great point where it's like, if you're too far apart, right, you need to realize why you're too far apart. Like, what is the apartness about, right? Like, so we started this thing is with, like, being angry, and when you're angry, you're focused on a specific element in your relationship, and then you want to have a better awareness about what is going on, right? And I think this would be a valid way to get back to the general awareness. But would it lead to understanding? I'm more thinking about, I have this idea of grounding, right? Like, there's a way in which you're grounded in your past experience, right? But you're also grounded in the conversation in a specific way, right? And if you establish a shared grounding, right, and I think that's what these steps allow you to do. It's allowing you to establish a shared way of understanding things. Then you can proceed from there. But I don't think that shared grounding is actually shared understanding. It's the start. It's a way to develop the shared understanding, right? We were talking about intimacy earlier, right? Like, it's a way to develop that intimate connection, right? And you don't necessarily even have to understand where that person is at, right? Because, like, probably you can't, because you haven't had that experience. But you do need to find ways to relate to them, and to be there for that person in whatever capacity that you can, right? So you have to connect the things that you can offer to the needs of the other person, right? And in order to do that, you need to know that there are needs, like what these needs are, how that person thinks you can fulfill that need, right? Like, how can you establish that relationship? And if you don't speak about these things, if you don't bring them to the surface, you'll never do it. Like, you just go back to being lucky or unlucky in your relationship.
Can you repeat the question that Sarah had?
Whether the 4 components, and I'll put them back on screen, lead to understanding, or is the understanding coming from somewhere else, right? So,
Okay. Well, I
so
don't know.
the components are observing what is happening right now, or with you, or in the conversation, right? And then what is the feeling that is associated to what's happening, right? And what is the need that is represented by the feeling, and then what can be done about it? What is the practical implication of that?
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking understanding sounds like, well, my experience with truly wanting to understand is coming from a desire uh, to not only be seen, but that thing that you're saying with the logos or the dialogos, where when you have that connection with another person, or even a complete stranger, or like when there's reconciliation between I've had with the opposition, where you actually see eye to eye, there's like something so satisfying about it. And when I think of I use the word desire intentionally, I think because of my understanding of that word. And I think the word comes from something like the roots of the word desire is something like a gift from the gods or something like this, And so and for me, what that really means is like that ineffable experience that we share when we are not only understood, but when we finally see something in somebody else. And when we do that, we see something, we discover something deeper within ourselves. And I think that's the truest form of seeking to understand and understanding others, is because it's like there's sometimes, in some sense, there's something there's nothing more satisfying than that. And so I don't know if that's helpful. Hopefully I'm not annoying you guys with my routing.
No, it's okay.
So I looked it up. This is really interesting. So the etymology for desire comes from Latin desidero, to long for, or to desire, feel the want of, miss, regret. But it's also apparently from de and sidus, in the phrase desidere, from the stars, in connection with astrological hopes. So there's the connection to like the gods, or to like this idea of like the fates, like how it's like something that you wish from the gods, or like it's not something that you can just obtain on your own.
That's excellent. That's very interesting. I will put it in the description later. Thank you, Ariel.
The desiderata starts go placidly among the noise and the haste.
Beautiful.
So what Chad reminded me of is that there's a way in which we seek validation, right? Like there's when we're upset, being upset means that your relationship with reality is upset, right? Your understanding of what's going on, and or at least your grasp on what's going on is frustrated. And being seen in the way that Chad was talking about is giving us a sense of, oh yeah, like what I'm going through is valid, right? Like there's a validation in the recognition of the other, right? Like I'm not insane, like it's real, it's manageable, right? Like there's a path forward, right? Like all of these things, they get manifested when we feel understood, when we feel seen. And I think when we're talking about hope, right, like that's the point where you can start holding on to the hope and drag yourself out back into a positive relationship.
Yeah. Okay, it had been 1.5 hours. I think we will try pretty soon with chapter 2, which would be talking about non-judgment. So do not have preconceived judgment, knowing you understand the other person before they had a chance to explain themselves. So, and there will be some practices with that. I'm really grateful to everyone who showed up. So thank you. Thank you so much. You will all be tagged. Okay.
Yeah, and we'll let everybody know when and where, and hope to have more participation next time, because it's a lot better when people join you on the journey.
Yeah, thank you. We need nonviolent communication, or even to criticize it as well.
Yeah, we need proper understanding so that we can act appropriate. Okay. See you all next time.
Take care. Have a good night, day, whatever time it is for everyone.
Toodles.
All right.